Hey, it's a mess. Um, it's April. With that in mind, I've decided to do a quarter wrap up. What can I say? I told you that the winter is hard for me. I really struggle. I felt like the winter just sucked my whole entire soul out of my ass. The videos did not get made. I read, but the videos did not get made. So I'm making them now. Guys, I'm hanging in there. I'm by the fucking skin of my teeth. I'm hanging in here. Let's talk about what I read in February. Welcome back to Abigail's Bookshelf. This is a quick recap of the 6 books that I read in January. The first 3 books that I read in January were Game Changer, Heated Rivalry, and Tough Guy. The first 3 books in the Heated Rivalry universe. I watched the show over the Christmas break, loved it. I watched it in like one sitting. I actually think I watched the first 5 episodes and then I got to wait for the cottage episode with everybody else. I miss like when we would watch TV shows together as a culture. That's the one thing I was never really big on Twitter, but that is one thing that I miss about having Twitter was being able to get on there and like see what everybody's thinking about the new episodes that just dropped. But now everything is like binging and like there's just too much content, and so not everybody's watching the same things, and like so it was just like really beautiful to have this content moment with the whole world and to see like so many different types of people enjoying Heated Rivalry was just so fun, and the actors have been so entertaining outside of the show. It's so great. I will preface this by saying I do not normally read romance, and not because I have any prejudices against the romance as a romance genre. I just like when I read, I really prefer world building. I prefer high stakes that aren't necessarily tied to interpersonal relationships. But what I do really like interpersonal relationships. I just like for them to be with more than one person. In my experience of romance, it's usually like that the romantic relationship is the priority. Like that's the whole genre, and the stakes are usually kind of low. And I'm not going to accuse it of being trope based because it's not any more trope based than any other genre. Obviously, every genre has its tropes. I think romance just gets a bad rap because women like it. My cat is trying to get in. I told her several times, but now she's scratching the door because she wants back in. And I really should stand firm and not let her back in. Well, now you've got to be in the video. You've got to be in the video. You can't even see her. All you can see her are eyeballs. Oh, bless her. She can't help the way she is. A soot sprite from hell. Anyway, where was I? Heated Rivalry series of books. I read them every one that I read in one sitting. They were fun. They were kind of silly. I personally feel like the show was done better. And so yeah, I read those 3. They were fine. This is gonna sound like an insane critique, especially considering I watched the whole entire show. I just felt the sex got really boring after like the 3rd scene. I was like, okay, girl, we get it. You know, how do these 2 feel about their childhood traumas? Can we talk about that? No, they were fun. I personally really loved the first book the most because, and I felt this way in the show as well. I just really connected with Scott Hunter's character arc and his story a lot more than the main boys, and so I preferred the first book. I felt like all of them just like didn't quite go there for me, and so that's kind of why they stayed at 3 stars for me. And I understand their romance, they're not meant to be high stakes, they're not trying to solve problems, it's just kind of smut, and that's fine. But that's my opinion. That's why I don't read very much romance. But they were fine, they were a good time. And I'm glad that they're popular, and I'm glad that people are reading anything. And I'm glad that they're reading queer books. So good job, 3 stars, Rachel Lee. Next book that I read, I don't even know how to preface it. I read Wuthering Heights again because the movie is coming out. Every time I think about it, I get angrier. So So, as I've said before, I enjoy being an informed hater. It'd been a really long time since I'd read Wuthering Heights, and so I decided if I was going to be bitchy about the movie, then I better be able to cite my sources. And so I read the book again, and I loved it just as much as the first time. I feel very personally strong about the Brontes, as most white girls with literature degree do. The one thing I will say that I noticed more on my second read through than I had the first time. In this edition, there is a preface, two prefaces actually, by Charlotte Bronte, who is Emily Bronte's elder sister. These were both written prior to Emily Bronte's death. All three of the Bronte sisters, as well as their brother Branwell and probably both of their parents and all of their siblings, died of tuberculosis in the Victorian era. And so Charlotte Bronte lived the longest. In the author preface by Charlotte Bronte, both of them, she goes to like really great lengths to defend Emily and to defend her against, in particular, the criticism of the book. And I just found it extremely interesting how she spent a lot of time explaining that Emily lived a very sheltered life and that everything she knew about the world was basically confined to a few square miles. They were very isolated in northern England where they were living during the Victorian period. They were a very insular group of people. They didn't have a lot of money to travel, and Emily in particular was very introverted and very, I don't know if I want to say fully like antisocial, but she was like not the belle of the ball. And Charlotte like goes to like really great lengths to explain this to the reader. It sounds like the kind of criticism that she was addressing was that people found her characters to be extremely rough and extremely coarse in a way that they found unbelievable and maybe even found offensive. I'm not really sure. It almost sounds like some people maybe were a little offended by how Emily portrayed the country folk of Northern England at the time. And so Charlotte is like really reactionary against that perception of her sister, and she goes to really great lengths to defend her art essentially. And I just found it really moving and really interesting. The next thing I'm going to say is how it was a story about men but told exclusively through the female view. And every time there was a narrator, except for the one narrator who is being told this story by a former servant of Heathcliff, servant/friend. It's complicated. Aside from the narrator, who is a man and who knows nothing about this place, he's an alien as far as they're concerned. He knows nothing of these people, nothing of their customs, nothing of England in the north during this time period. So every time there's a change in perspective, it's always from a female perspective. And it's always from what I would consider the woman who was most victimized by that part of the story, which I found really, really interesting. And that's also really interesting because you don't really hear very much from Kathy's perspective. There's a couple of moments where the narrator discovers journals by her when she was a child, but for the most part, her actual perspective is not known. And I think that's just such a really interesting way to paint the heroes and the villains of this story. And of course, like in real life, and in this novel, like it's not so black and white. Some people are villains sometimes and some people are heroes sometimes, and there's overlap and it's transitory. But in particular, there are a couple of women who are like extremely victimized by this story, by Heathcliff's behavior. And I just found it really interesting. I had not noticed the first time that I read it how centered it is on the voices of the marginalized women in this story, which I think is really interesting. And something that maybe an adaptation should try to do something with. The fifth book that I read in January, I actually started it back in September. I was enjoying it, but I put it down and I did not pick it back up again until this month. And it's just been kind of staring at me on my shelf, and I'm like, I should just finish it. And it's so disappointing because the concept of the book, love. The cover art, love. I bought it solely based on the cover art. And I do not have this book any longer because I didn't like it. I donated it. But it was very disappointing that I really wanted to like this and just didn't. And that is A Ballad for Slayers and Monsters by Rita A. Rubin. Premise of this book is a monster hunter whose family was killed by vampires, journeys with a vampire, and they fall in love. And it's very much like The Witcher meets Castlevania. Those are like two of my favorite things. The cover art was like Gideon and Ianthe from Gideon the Ninth. those are my two favorite characters, I was seated, basically, is what I'm telling you. All of the stars were aligning for me. Unfortunately, the problem with this book is, in my personal opinion, that it was self-published. I have given a lot of self-published books a chance, and I don't want to sound like I don't think self-published books can be good, because that's objectively untrue. But in my experience, there's more of a trend in self-publishing to not, I guess, like, go it alone. There's not the same level of editing, of like getting feedback. It's a lot more of like, I made this thing and now it's here. And a more traditional publishing route would be, there would be a lot more eyes on the page, essentially. And we can argue until the cows come home about if this is not if this is still true about traditional publishing. I've seen some books that maybe look like very few eyes have seen them, but I feel like some of the things that I had issues with in this book would have been solved by a really good editor. It just had very much like the hallmarks of self-publishing to me that I just couldn't get over. The prose was a little bit clunky. Things were very wish fulfillment, I feel like, more so than story driven. In a more, like, it felt more kind of like a fan fiction sometimes. The plot was, I feel like, kind of all over the place. Those to me are like deep structural issues that would have prevented this book maybe from reaching an editor's desk. That kind of would have been stuff that turned away on the agent side and, maybe could have been fixed. But I don't know. It's tough because, like I said, I really, really wanted to like it. I really want a self-published author to change my mind about what self-publishing is like. And I personally know some people who are self-publishing who are like really going the extra mile with making sure that their book is as professionally prepared as possible. I just think that the cost of that is prohibitive for a lot of self-published authors. And a lot of them are more concerned with like getting their stuff out as quickly as possible and not so much concerned with making something that's really strong. Sorry, that sounds so mean. But that's just how I feel. Next book that I finished, my nonfiction book for January, A Short History of the Gaza Strip by Anne Irfan. This is hard to review, right? Like, I will say, I think it provided a very clear and a very succinct history of a really complicated situation. I think it was as fair as it could be to both sides, considering. So this book was primarily concerned with the sort of situation in Israel Gaza as of I think it starts in like the 1940s, like the end of World War II, when Britain is like, hey, I'm in charge. Let's chop up this place where people live and make choices for them that they don't get to have an opinion on. So it starts kind of there. So it's not so much giving you like a really in-depth like overview of like the region in general. It's very specific on Israel-Palestine situation as it has manifested in the modern times. I will admit I knew extremely little about this situation, partly because in American schooling systems, we kind of stop after World War II. And even then, like, we're very focused on a Western view of things. And so there just like I had no idea about a lot of the stuff that had happened over there. And I think it was obviously very hard to read. It was extremely hard to read. She really pulled no punches on explaining the sort of devastation on civilian populations that's happened in Gaza in particular. This is more focused on specifically Gaza rather than the region as a whole. And it was really, really hard to read. It was really, really hard to read. But I think maybe for people who are not so sure on where they stand somehow, this could be something that helps you kind of get some more context for the background of the conflict that's happening and the genocide that's going on in Palestine. And I shouldn't have to say this, but it is a genocide. And what Israel is doing is completely reprehensible and completely obscene and completely indefensible. And I mean, there's not really much more to say than that. I feel like it's a really good starting point. So if there is something in there that kind of catches your attention, you can go investigate that thing further. And she has a lot of really great resources. And yeah, it's tough to read. And I think it was especially tough thinking about her writing this in March of 2025, almost a whole entire year ago, and things have only gotten worse. So, yeah, it was a tough read, but a necessary read. I'm glad that I read it, and I highly recommend that you read it as well if you are like me and didn't really know a whole lot about the situation. It's kind of black and white, I think, so highly recommend. But also be wary of your personal boundaries in reading hard stuff like that. The last book that I read in January, really not bringing up the mood at all, is actually one that was recommended to me by my boss. One of the humanities professors was leaving and he left behind a bunch of books. And so we were in there just kind of looking through his collection. And he handed me this book. He's like, if you've never read it, you've got to read this one. It's great. It's funny. I I missed the funny, but I did really enjoy this book. It's very steeped in a very specific history that I, again, don't really know that much about. The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. It was really good. It was actually so good. I got about halfway and then bought a copy for my sister for Christmas. And part of that is because of the subject matter of this book. It is set in post World War II. Again, are we sensing a trend about things going wrong after World War II? Anyway, in the Czech Republic, I believe it was still called the Czech Republic at this time. If I'm saying the wrong word, I'm so sorry. It's mostly charting the sort of rise of state-sanctioned fascism from Russia into the Balkan region, particularly in Prague. It follows this guy, Tomas, who is a self-described and slightly proud adulterer, womanizer, maybe, I guess would be a better word. He's a freak. He's a freaking loser. He's a famous doctor, and it charts the course of his life from his probably like early middle age until his death. And it's largely concerned with his relationship to his wife, Teresa, and his sort of coming to terms with himself and his flaws and his failings. It was a very contemplative read. I did not like Tomas. I loved Teresa. I thought Teresa was a very interesting character. And there are a couple of side characters that come in and out that I found pretty interesting. Another woman, the man sucked, is concerned with this idea that, what does he call it? The eternal return. The sort of philosophical question that this book is dealing with is this concept of the eternal return, which was popularized by Amy. Please type this word on the screen and put in a Google voice saying how to pronounce this name. The eternal return, which is popularized by
Nietzsche,
which is concerned with this thing that basically things don't mean anything. And how do we as people deal with the fact that they mean nothing? And that's where this kind of the lightness in the title comes from. It's a little bit over my head. I was with him sometimes, he lost me other times. This book is very philosophical, and it's very concerned with what things mean and where meaning is, and all of these like really highbrow things that kind of went right over my head. However, I found the story itself really engaging, and I think that there were moments when the narrator was able to kind of dumb down the philosophy enough for me to catch on to what he was saying. And I found it a very engaging book. Liking it is kind of out of the question, but I did find it engaging and I did find it thought-provoking. And one of the things that I want to do this year is read more things that challenge me and make me uncomfortable. I think it's good that I struggled with a lot of the concepts in this book and I wasn't really sure how I felt about it. I think we should get more comfortable with being uncomfortable about things and not having firm opinions and not understanding fully, and just be curious about those things. I will probably go look up some of these things, at a later date and read more about it. I feel like this is a book that's going to kind of stick with me. There's going to be things, and I don't know that much about the history of communism in Czech Republic, Hungary. I think they go to Geneva for a little bit, but not for very long. I don't know much about what the communists, Russian fascists, whatever you want to call them, were doing at this time. But there is like one scene in particular about suicide that was extremely harrowing to me. The main character does not commit suicide, but like there is a institution of suicide that's brought up that I can only assume that this is written with some kind of modicum of reality, because Milan Kundera was a revolutionary in the Czech Republic at this time. And so I'm imagining that a lot of what he's writing is probably entirely based on reality. I keep catching myself thinking about it, so I think this book will stick with me for better or worse. It was a very strange little book. It was one that I had to like take time with and chew over, and there were some like chapters that I had to reread over and over again to try to understand what he was saying. And what I'm trying to say is I liked that, and I think that was good for me, and that's something I want to seek out more this year. So those are the 7 books that I read in January. Here's what I read in February. So the first 3 books that I read are the next 3 books in the Heated Rivalry series. And hey, don't ask me what those are about. I don't remember. Gay hockey romance is about as far as I can get with that train of thought. I do not remember what these were about. Common Goal, I think, was the one with Fabian, who's like a singer. So the issue with these books is they're all kind of like the same thing, right? Like they're all just gay hockey because they were not written by a gay male. The sex is very vanilla. It's very kind of rinse and repeat. I was skipping the sex scenes eventually because I was like, yeah, I got it, thanks. Gay hockey. But I will say for Common Goal, that one at least like it felt a little bit fresh compared to the others. She was doing a little bit more with gender expression than she had in the others. All of the others are very much like gay hockey, kind of macho on macho guys, and Fabian was a little bit more femme, so that was at least something a little bit more interesting. And then Role Model, I think that was on the social media manager. I don't really remember. I'll give Rachel Reed credit for including some sensitive topics in her books, but they're like romance books, right? Like the erotica is kind of the thing, and so she doesn't really give, in my opinion, enough character development or theme development for any of those to like mean much. Like when she's talking about like sexual violence, even the homophobia angle, I think she just like really doesn't quite give it enough space. Like I'm interested in like the those kind of like conversations, and that's just like that's not what these books are about. So credit for including it, but it's not like it's not going anywhere. So next up was Just As You Are by Cameron Kellogg. This is a modern sapphic retelling of Pride and Prejudice, centering around a queer magazine that is being bought by the Mr. Bingley character. It was good. Like I enjoyed it. I think again, it's a romance. It's missing some of the nuance that Pride and Prejudice has. And this is like not just on Kellogg's book. Like this is, I think, anytime anybody tries to just do a Pride and Prejudice retelling, and why I usually don't read retellings are because they just like don't get to like what the point of Pride and Prejudice was, which was kind of about class. And I feel like this one added, I mean, not every retelling has to be completely faithful to the themes or has to agree with or expound upon those themes, but I do want them to have themes. I did like the conversations that were had about gender and gender expression. I thought that was interesting, and I found a lot of stuff that resonated with me personally. So yeah, it was fine. It was an enjoyable read. I will say some of the characters were not very likable, and not likable in the way that like, obviously all of the Bennets are not necessarily great people, but they're likable. Like they have their own kind of charms, and I didn't feel the charm with some of the Bennett characters involved. So I don't know. It was okay. Next up was The Devil She Knows by Alexandra Bellefleur. So this one is about a woman who has just been broken up with. The day she gets broken up with, she goes in the elevator to her building, and the elevator malfunctions, and she gets trapped in an elevator with a stranger. And the stranger turns out to be a devil and like convinces the main character to sell her soul in exchange for, I can't remember how many wishes it was. It was more than 3. I want to maybe like say like 7 or something. So I love a good sell your soul to the devil story. So it was a lot of fun. It was very charming. It was pretty sexy. Daphne, who is the devil, my beloved. I love a girl who just cannot keep it together for any reason at all. And she was just a lot of fun. So that was a cute one. Last book I read in February is The Social Sex by Marilyn Yalom. I didn't like it. Don't recommend. Hated it. And that's what I read in February. March was not a great month for me. Again, I hate winter and I want nothing more than for winter to be over the moment Christmas is done. And unfortunately, that's not the way the world works. So I was struggling and work was crazy and like just so much going on. So in March I read 2 books. I read The Lost City of the Monkey God by Douglas Preston. Loved. I really, really enjoyed it. It's about a group of filmmakers. I want to start with filmmakers. Archaeologists, scientists, researchers who are trying to find this fabled lost city in Honduras in I think the book starts around like the early 2000s and then the main expedition takes place in 2017, 2018 maybe. I don't remember exactly what the years are, but it's like recent. And yeah, it was really interesting. It was really engaging. I think Preston did a good job talking about some kind of sensitive things. And at the time that I was reading this, I was thinking about this novel idea I had about an archaeologist, so it was good to read. But like I said, I think that he deals with the kind of nuances of the conversation really well, being like a white guy discovering things in Latin America. I love kind of like archaeology stuff like that, like Indiana Jones style, National Geographic sort of documentary stuff. So it was really fun. That was awesome. Loved that one. That was my nonfiction pick for March. Next book that I read in March, last book I read in March, was a translation of Gilgamesh by Stephen Mitchell. I'd never read Gilgamesh somehow, but obviously I've like heard about it. And so I wanted to finally check it out. I want to like read another translation because I don't know much about Stephen Mitchell, but from his introduction, it sounded like he was kind of more interested in the artistic side rather than like a faithful translation. So I would want to read something like slightly more faithful to the original text. But overall, it was interesting. It was much shorter than I thought it was going to be. I thought there was more of it, and maybe there is, and he just didn't want to talk about it, but it was okay. Okay, so I've updated my book bingo and I've ended up with 2 bingos. Not too shabby. And let me tell you what, I'm so excited to get to my spring bingo. I am so excited to get to my spring bingo. I'm ready. I'm ready to go. So I hope you're ready for more book reviews. This channel is waking back up. Hibernation's over. And yeah, that's what I read in Q1. That's what I read in winter. Let me know if you followed along and got any bingos. If you have any recommendations for anything on the spring board, please also comment those as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you soon.